Welcome, dear listeners, to a place where true family stories come alive. Tales of sacrifice, love, and the battles we fight for those we hold closest. If you believe in the strength of mothers, the innocence of children, and the power of justice, don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us bring you more stories that matter. Today's story is called They Tried to Take My Son Because I Was Poor, but Here is How I Fought Back. The gavel struck wood, a sound as final as thunder rolling across a flat Midwestern sky. Inside the courthouse, the air was heavy, pressed down by whispers and judgments that had nothing to do with the law and everything to do with money. On one side of the polished oak table sat a man in a tailored suit, his watch gleaming like a small sun, surrounded by lawyers who smelled faintly of confidence. On the other side sat a woman whose hands trembled as they held a child close, her only child, a boy with searching eyes who clung to the hem of her dress as though it were the last safe harbor he knew. The judge cleared his throat. Everyone knew what was coming. The case had been framed as simple: a wealthy father, capable of providing comfort, stability, every opportunity a child might need, and a struggling mother, earning barely enough to keep the lights on, accused of being incapable of meeting the demands of raising a child with special needs. The gallery leaned forward. Some shook their heads with quiet pity. Others glanced at the boy, then at the father's lawyers, as if the decision had already been written in stone. But the mother sat there, holding her son tighter, feeling his small heartbeat drum against her chest. She did not hear the whispers, nor did she see the nods toward the man with the shining watch. She only felt the weight of the moment, that in the next breath, in the next sentence spoken from the bench, she could lose her child forever. Her knees shook beneath the table. Her lips pressed into silent prayer. She thought of nights when her boy awoke screaming, overwhelmed by sounds the world dismissed as ordinary. She thought of mornings when he would not eat unless she cut his toast into perfect squares. And she thought of every time he whispered, "Mom," in his halting, hard-won voice, the word that carried both his struggle and her salvation. The judge adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. "This court," he began, his voice low and deliberate, "has reviewed the testimony, the reports, and the evidence presented." Time seemed to stretch. The boy squirmed, pressing his face into the fold of his mother's arm. She kissed the top of his head, her lips salty with tears she refused to shed openly. Behind her, a murmur rose, the assumption of victory, the quiet rustle of victory papers being slid across a polished table. But the mother, though trembling, was not finished. Not yet, for she carried something more powerful than any legal brief or financial ledger. She carried a truth no judge could fully measure, and no father's fortune could buy. And though the courtroom had already decided who should win, the story of how she would fight back was only beginning. Before there was a courtroom, before the polished wood and the judgmental eyes, there was a marriage that had already collapsed under its own silence. He was a man admired by colleagues, the kind of husband who could win contracts with a firm handshake and charm investors over a single glass of wine. On the outside, he gleamed. But at home, where the weight of tenderness was required, he was absent. Not cruel in words, at least not often, but in the small, cutting ways that reveal where a heart truly resides. He measured success in promotions and profits, while she measured it in whispered lullabies, in first steps, in the quiet miracle of a boy who spoke his first word after months of trying. When the diagnosis came that their son was on the spectrum, it was not met with shared resolve but with distance. He saw it as an inconvenience, a blemish on the perfect portrait of his advancing life. She, however, saw it as a call. Every appointment, every therapy session, every late-night article she read by the glow of her phone became a map for survival. Nights in that house were long and restless. Their boy would wake, overwhelmed, screaming at shadows only he could feel. The father rolled over, pulling a pillow across his ears. The mother got up, always the mother, and walked barefoot across the cold floor, lifting her child into arms that never failed him. She held him as though she could absorb his storm inside her chest. She hummed softly, though her throat was raw from exhaustion, until his cries softened into hiccups, until his heartbeat steadied against hers. There were dinners where the father scrolled through emails, his plate barely touched, while she coaxed their son to take just one bite, then another, celebrating each small victory as if it were a triumph worthy of applause. There were mornings when the man left in a rush, tie knotted, briefcase snapping shut, leaving her with spilled cereal, a tantrum on the kitchen floor, and a work shift to clock into within the hour. The distance widened, thread by thread, until love had no fabric left to cling to. Papers were signed, coldly, efficiently. He moved into a new house with polished floors and no toys cluttering the hallway. She remained in the modest apartment with peeling paint and neighbors who sometimes knocked to complain about the noise. But in that cramped apartment, she learned what true devotion demanded. She worked double shifts, came home with aching feet, and still found the strength to sit cross-legged on the carpet, stacking blocks with her son long past midnight. She whispered encouragement when he grew frustrated, kissed his damp cheeks when tears came, and celebrated the smallest progress as if it were a miracle carved into the night. This was her world, sleepless, sacrificial, stitched together by persistence and love. While he measured his days in billable hours and conference calls, she measured hers in the fragile victories of a boy who, against every prediction, was learning to say, Mom. And though her past bore the bruises of abandonment, it also carried proof. She had always been the one who stayed. In the courtroom, the man looked flawless. His suit was pressed, his shoes gleamed, and his voice carried the smoothness of someone accustomed to winning. To strangers, he resembled every magazine photograph of the American dream, a provider, successful, confident, untouchable. His lawyers painted him in brighter colors still. They spoke of financial security, of private schools with tailored programs, of a future safeguarded by wealth. They spoke of stability, as though money itself could cradle a child through midnight storms. They gestured to spreadsheets and expert reports, each line a carefully chosen brushstroke meant to render him the portrait of the perfect father. The gallery nodded. The judge listened, unmoved but attentive. And for a moment, it seemed the story would end as so many do, tilted by the weight of gold, pressed down by the quiet prejudice that poverty and parenthood cannot coexist. Yet behind the polished image was the truth that had never made it into the reports. The father who had left therapy sessions early, phone buzzing with meetings more urgent than his child's fragile progress. The father who dismissed meltdowns as misbehavior, who muttered that the boy would grow out of it, as if autism were a phase to be outgrown, like baby teeth. No lawyer mentioned the nights when he turned away from his son's cries. No one spoke of the birthday he missed because a client's dinner felt more pressing, or the way the child's eyes followed the door long after he left, waiting for a presence that would never return. On paper, he was perfection. In photographs, he was poised. But in the life that truly mattered, he was a shadow, seen only in glimpses, never staying long enough to warm the room. The mother sat across from him, her dress plain, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had no glossy reports, no polished witnesses. She only had the memory of every sleepless night, every tantrum soothed, every word coaxed from her son's hesitant lips. She had love, raw and unshakable, though it could not be quantified in the neat columns of a financial statement. The lawyers for the father leaned forward, voices steady, rehearsed. Your Honor, this is not about love. It is about capability. It is about ensuring this child's future. And the mother's heart broke at the casual dismissal, because they could not see what she knew with certainty. That capability is not measured by income alone. Capability is found in patience at 2 a.m., in the arms that never grow tired, in the voice that whispers calm when the world becomes too loud. But in that moment, none of it mattered. The weight of his wealth pressed down on the room like an invisible hand, tilting the balance in his favor. And all she could do was hold her son tighter, praying that somewhere in the shadows of this fight, the truth of who truly loved him would find its way to the light. When the court adjourned for the day, she left the building with her son's small hand locked in hers, as if he were an anchor against a tide determined to pull them apart. The city was loud, car horns, hurried footsteps, voices rising in every direction. For her boy, the noise was unbearable. He pressed his palms over his ears, his face folding into distress. She bent down, whispered to him softly, and began humming the same lullaby she had sung since his first restless nights. Gradually, his breathing steadied. That evening, when her son finally slept, she sat at the kitchen table in their cramped apartment, exhaustion pressing down on her shoulders. The glow of the computer screen was her only light. She searched for answers, for help, for anything. And in a quiet corner of the internet, she found them, an online forum of parents who understood exactly what it meant to raise a child on the spectrum. At first, she only read. Stories poured across her screen. A mother in Michigan teaching her daughter to communicate through picture cards, a father in Oregon building sensory-friendly play spaces out of wood scraps, a grandmother in Texas standing up to a school district that wanted to exclude her grandson. Each story hummed with struggle, yes, but also with triumph. Finally, she wrote her own post. She told them about the courtroom, about the wealth stacked against her, about the fear that her boy would be taken away. She admitted she was afraid, terrified, even that love would not be enough. By morning, the replies were waiting, dozens of them. Some sent encouragement, some offered advice, others shared research articles and links to therapies she could try at home. One mother wrote, "We may not have money, but we have knowledge. Don't underestimate what you can build with love and information." It was as if she had stumbled into a circle of mothers gathered around a fire, each one holding out warmth to the next. They became her midnight companions. They shared videos of exercises, tips for calming meltdowns, strategies for helping her son find words when the world became too overwhelming. Slowly, she began to weave these lessons into their daily routine. And when she looked at her boy, his eyes meeting hers a little longer, his small hand guiding hers to a puzzle piece, his lips forming sounds that had once seemed impossible, she saw more than progress. She saw hope. In the silence of her apartment, with the hum of the refrigerator and the soft rhythm of her son's breathing in the next room, she realized something profound. She was not as alone as the courtroom had made her feel. There was an invisible army of parents stretched across the country who had chosen love over surrender. And now she was one of them. The apartment was small, too small, really, for the storm of challenges that swirled inside it. But within its worn walls, she began to craft something extraordinary. Each morning, before heading to her shift at the diner, she set aside time for lessons. Not lessons in the traditional sense, but the kind her online circle of mothers had taught her, turning everyday objects into tools of growth. A set of measuring cups became instruments for teaching volume and patience. Empty cereal boxes turned into flashcards, decorated with bright colors to coax her son into naming shapes and letters. The hallway became a runway where he practiced walking in rhythm, step by step, matching his mother's slow and steady count. Progress came like the first drops of rain in a drought, hesitant, uncertain, but alive. The boy began stacking blocks into towers, no longer scattering them in frustration. He looked at her face longer now, his eyes searching for approval, for connection. And one evening, when she guided his hand to a spoon, he lifted it shakily to his mouth, spilling half the food but smiling with triumph. She clapped and laughed, tears filling her eyes. To anyone else, it might have seemed a small thing. To her, it was proof of possibility. There were setbacks, too. Nights when he screamed until dawn, overwhelmed by sounds she couldn't silence. Days when the world's indifference weighed on her so heavily she thought she might break. But each time, she remembered the chorus of voices online, the mothers and fathers who told her, "Hold steady, tomorrow can be better." She started documenting his progress with her phone. Short clips of him naming colors, piecing together puzzles, clapping to the beat of a nursery rhyme. Not polished videos, just raw, shaky footage, the kind only a mother could treasure. She didn't know then how important those videos would become, how they would one day speak louder than any lawyer in a courtroom. At work, customers saw only a tired waitress with circles under her eyes. They didn't see the battle she fought each night, the lessons carved out of fatigue, the victories earned in whispers. But she knew. She knew that in the quiet spaces of her modest home, she was building something far greater than wealth. She was building resilience. She was building proof. And with every small triumph, she whispered a silent vow to her son: "They may have money, they may have lawyers, but they will never know you the way I do." And that is my strength. The apartment, once a place of peeling paint and secondhand furniture, had become a classroom of miracles. And in that unlikely sanctuary, a mother was preparing for the battle of her life. The courthouse smelled faintly of varnish and paper, the air heavy with the weight of decisions that would change lives. She had begun to carry with her a quiet confidence, a fragile flame lit by the progress she saw at home. She believed, perhaps naively, that if the judge could only see her son the way she did, the case would be clear. But the system was not built for belief. On the morning of the next hearing, she sat at the plaintiff's table, her boy coloring clumsy circles on a piece of scrap paper beside her. Across the aisle, her former husband leaned back in his chair, polished and certain, flanked by a pair of lawyers with briefcases that seemed heavier than the law itself. The judge shuffled the reports. His face was unreadable, but when he spoke, her stomach turned to stone. The independent evaluator has filed an updated assessment, he said, adjusting his glasses. The findings are concerning. Her heart thudded. She remembered the evaluator, a man with a calm voice and polite smile who had visited her apartment weeks earlier. He had sat on her couch, asked gentle questions, watched her son play with blocks. She had offered coffee. She had trusted him. The judge continued, his voice a steady hammer. The evaluator concludes that while the mother is loving, she lacks the structured resources and long-term capacity to provide adequately for a child with autism. The father, by contrast, offers financial stability and access to specialized programs. The words struck like blows. She could feel the courtroom tilting against her, the whispers from the gallery echoing what she already feared. She loves her son, but love is not enough. Her lawyer leaned over, whispering, "Don't react, stay calm." But inside she was burning. The report was wrong. Worse than wrong, it was dishonest. She had the videos, the proof of progress, the evidence that her son was thriving in her care. How could the evaluator dismiss it all? That night, after putting her son to bed, she sat in the dim kitchen, staring at the copy of the report. The words blurred through her tears: insufficient capacity, long-term risk, inadequate support. She pressed her palms against her eyes until stars of pain burst in the darkness. When her phone buzzed with a new message, she nearly ignored it, but something in the subject line made her freeze. It was from an anonymous sender. The message contained only one sentence: "Check who paid for your evaluator's vacation last month." Attached was a single email screenshot, half cut off but damning enough. A note from her ex-husband's lawyer to the evaluator, thanking him for his cooperation and promising future arrangements. Her chest tightened. She read the lines again and again, her hands trembling. If it was true, the entire process had been poisoned. If it was true, the scales had been rigged from the start. She didn't sleep. She sat by her son's bed, watching him stir in dreams, his lips moving softly as if reciting a language only he understood. She stroked his hair and whispered, "I won't let them take you, not like this." By dawn, her decision was made. She needed help beyond her small circle of online mothers. She needed someone who understood the machinery of corruption, someone who could dig deeper than she could ever manage alone. At lunch, while her boy stacked blocks at the diner booth where she worked, she pulled out her phone and called a number given to her weeks earlier by one of the forum mothers. "If you ever hit a wall," that mother had said, "reach out to this reporter. He's not afraid of walls." The reporter answered on the third ring. His voice was brisk, curious. She told him everything about the custody battle, the evaluator's sudden change of tone, the anonymous email. He listened, asked questions, and finally said, "Send me what you have, all of it. If there's a trail, I'll find it." She hung up, heart pounding. For the first time, she felt a strange mixture of fear and hope. Fear that she was now stepping into a larger fight than she ever imagined. Hope that perhaps the truth could still surface. That evening, she uploaded the videos of her son's progress, the forums of advice, the records she had kept with meticulous care. She attached the suspicious email. She pressed send. Then she sat back in the worn kitchen chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She thought of the courtroom's cold glare, the father's polished smile, the evaluator's polite lies. She thought of how the world saw her, poor, tired, overmatched. But in that quiet kitchen, surrounded by proof of her son's small miracles, she knew a deeper truth. She was not weak. She was not incapable. She was a mother standing in the shadows of a corrupt system, and now, at last, she had a light to shine. Outside, the city pulsed with its usual indifference. Inside, a mother braced herself for the storm that was coming, because the fight for her child was no longer just a case in court. It was a battle for truth itself. The reporter called 2 days later. His voice was steady, but beneath it she sensed the current of urgency. "I think you'd better sit down," he said. She gripped the phone tighter, her son humming to himself at the table beside her, carefully lining up toy cars in a perfect row. She lowered her voice. "What did you find?" There was a pause, then the sound of papers shuffling. "Your evaluator, Dr. Kessler, took a trip last month. First-class airfare, a resort in Florida. Expenses covered. On paper, it looks like a professional conference. But the payment trail tells a different story. The credit card used to book the flight came from a law firm account, your ex-husband's law firm." Her chest tightened. She had prepared herself for corruption, but hearing it spoken aloud felt like stepping into icy water. So the report was bought. Not just the report, the reporter continued. "I traced more emails. There's direct communication between the firm and Kessler. Promises of future collaboration, references to aligning findings with desired outcomes. It's all coded language, but the intent is clear. They paid him to undermine you." She pressed her palm against the table to steady herself. In the other room, her boy let out a small laugh at his own neat row of cars, a bright sound in the middle of her storm. "What do we do with this?" she whispered. "We expose it," he said simply. "But it has to be airtight. If we go public too soon, they'll spin it, bury it, make you look paranoid. I need more. A whistleblower, a paper trail, something the judge can't dismiss as speculation." Her hands trembled, but her voice was clear. "Then I'll help you find it." That night, she scoured the forum of parents again. She posted carefully, without names, asking if anyone had ever felt cheated by an evaluator's sudden change in testimony. Replies poured in. Stories from mothers and fathers across the country. Stories of assessments rewritten, of recommendations that favored the parent with deeper pockets. One mother wrote, "We lost custody because we couldn't afford the right evaluator. I knew it wasn't about the child, it was about the money." The pattern was undeniable, and within the flood of responses came a message that made her heart skip. "Check the billing codes. They sometimes double charge for reports. One for the court, one for the lawyer. That's how we caught them in Texas. Billing codes, paper trails." She began calling offices, requesting copies of every invoice, every receipt tied to her evaluation. Most clerks dismissed her politely, some with impatience. But one young assistant, after a long silence, lowered her voice and said, "If you come tomorrow, I'll leave something for you at the front desk. Don't mention my name." The next morning, with her son bundled in a jacket and his toy car tucked into his pocket, she walked into the evaluator's office. The receptionist handed her an envelope, thin and ordinary. She thanked her and left quickly, her heart racing. At home, she opened it with trembling hands. Inside were billing statements, duplicates, overlapping charges, inconsistencies that made no sense unless someone had been paid twice. Once by the court, once by the lawyer. She sent everything to the reporter. Within an hour, he called back. His tone was different this time, measured, but electric with possibility. "This is it. This is the crack we needed. With the emails and these invoices, we have proof of misconduct. It's not just unethical, it's illegal." Her breath caught. For the first time in weeks, she felt a surge of power, fragile but real. The reporter's voice softened. "Listen, they're going to come hard when this breaks. Your ex-husband has money, connections. But if we're careful, if we move step by step, the truth will hold." She looked at her son, sitting cross-legged on the carpet, pushing his toy car along the seam of the rug, lost in a world that only he could see. She thought of how close she had come to losing him, of how the system had nearly sold their bond for the price of a vacation. And she knew in that moment that the fight was no longer about survival. It was about justice, not just for her, but for every parent who had been told that love was not enough. She whispered a promise into the quiet room. "They may have bought their experts, their reports, their lies, but I have the truth, and the truth will not be silent." The storm was gathering, and for the first time she felt ready to meet it head on. The next few days felt like walking a tightrope above a canyon. Every sound in the hallway, every phone call, every unexpected knock at the door set her nerves on edge. She knew that once the truth came out, there would be no turning back. The reporter, his name was Daniel, met her in a quiet coffee shop across town. He looked younger than she expected, his jacket too thin for the February chill, but his eyes were sharp, restless. He slid a folder across the table. "These invoices," he said, tapping the pages she had brought him, "combined with the emails I've traced, are more than enough to raise red flags. But if we want the court and the public to listen, we need a voice from inside, someone who saw the arrangement firsthand." She stirred her coffee, though she had no appetite for it. "You're talking about a whistleblower." Daniel nodded. "The assistant who gave you those papers may be willing to testify, but it's risky. She could lose her job, maybe worse." Her stomach twisted. Asking someone else to step into this fire felt unbearable, and yet she knew the system would not bend for her word alone. That night, she found herself writing a letter she never intended to send. A letter to her son, explaining why she fought, why she could not give up. "If one day you ask me why I kept going when it seemed impossible," she wrote, "it's because you are the best proof of my strength. Every word you learn, every small victory, is worth more than all their polished lies." She folded the letter, placed it inside a worn Bible on her nightstand, and slept with her hand resting on its cover. 2 mornings later, she received a message. It was from the assistant, the young woman who had slipped her the billing documents. "Meet me at the library, back table." She went, her son holding her hand, his toy car tucked into his jacket pocket as always. The assistant sat waiting, nervously twisting her scarf. When she spoke, her voice trembled. "I've seen too much," she whispered. "It isn't just your case, they've done this before. Evaluations, reports, all tailored to whoever pays. I kept copies, I don't want to be part of it anymore." She slid a flash drive across the table, her hand shaking. "But if my name comes out, I lose everything." The mother clasped her hand gently. "You're not alone, we'll protect you." With the new evidence in hand, Daniel moved quickly. He contacted a colleague at a national newspaper, someone known for exposing corruption. Together, they began piecing the story into a tapestry too strong to be dismissed. Every document, every receipt, every email was cross-checked. Patterns emerged: payments disguised as consulting fees, vacations labeled as professional development, reports altered days before hearings. It was bigger than one custody battle. It was a system of betrayal, quietly selling the futures of children to the highest bidder. Meanwhile, she continued her nightly rituals at home. The progress videos grew longer. Her son began stringing words together, awkward, halting, but undeniably words. "Car red," he said one evening, pointing proudly at his favorite toy. She caught it on video, tears running down her face, and whispered, "Yes, baby, red car, that's perfect." Each clip became another piece of armor for the war ahead. When Daniel returned with his notebook brimming with evidence, he looked different, tired, but also charged with conviction. "We're going public," he told her. "Not just in the paper. Television, social media, everywhere. Once this breaks, they won't be able to hide it." Her heart pounded. "And the court?" He met her gaze. "The court will have no choice but to listen." For the first time, she saw her fight stretch beyond the narrow walls of her apartment or the intimidating walls of the courthouse. This was no longer just her battle. It belonged to every mother and father who had been silenced by wealth, every child whose future had been weighed against a dollar sign. She took her son into her arms that night and whispered, "We're not alone anymore." Outside, the city was blanketed in snow, muffling the noise of traffic, softening the sharp edges of the streets. Inside, she felt something stirring, fragile but unstoppable. An alliance had been formed, and with it, a chance to turn the tide. The next chapter would not be fought in shadows. It would be fought in the open, where truth could burn its way through the lies. The courthouse steps were crowded that morning. Reporters gathered with cameras, microphones tilted like weapons toward the heavy wooden doors. Word of the scandal had spread quickly, and now the trial was no longer a private matter. It was a spectacle. She walked up those steps slowly, her son's small hand tucked inside hers, Daniel trailing just behind with his worn satchel of evidence. Flashes from cameras lit the cold winter air, but she kept her eyes forward. Her boy clutched his red toy car, holding it against his chest like a shield. Inside, the air buzzed. The judge entered, expression more rigid than before. On one side of the room, her ex-husband sat polished as always, though this time there was a faint sheen of sweat on his forehead. His lawyers whispered in urgent tones, their eyes darting toward the journalists lining the back rows. "Order," the judge said, his gavel striking the bench. The hearing began like the others, with legal language and carefully chosen words. The father's attorneys argued with rehearsed conviction, stability, resources, opportunity. They gestured at charts and programs, painting their client as the only logical choice. Then it was her turn. Her lawyer stood, but before he could speak, Daniel rose from his chair. He held up a stack of printed emails, his voice steady. "Your Honor, new evidence has surfaced. It demonstrates a financial relationship between the father's counsel and the court-appointed evaluator. Vacations, payments, and reports tailored to favor one party. This is not conjecture. This is documented." The room shifted. Murmurs spread like wildfire. The judge frowned, extending a hand. Daniel crossed the aisle, placing the documents directly into the judge's grasp. For a long moment, the only sound was the rustle of papers. The judge's eyes moved quickly, narrowing as he read, then he looked up sharply. "These allegations are serious. Is the evaluator present today?" At the back of the room, Dr. Kessler stood, pale and rigid. "Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding." The judge cut him off. "Did you accept payment from counsel while preparing your evaluation?" Kessler's mouth opened, then closed. Silence pressed heavy on the room. Finally, his shoulders sagged. I was compensated for consulting. It had no bearing." The judge's hand struck the gavel. "Enough. This court will not tolerate corruption in matters of a child's welfare." Her ex-husband shifted uneasily, his composure cracking for the first time. "This is outrageous," he said, his voice sharp. "She's orchestrated some smear campaign." The judge's glare silenced him. Then came her moment. Her lawyer gestured and she stood, her knees trembling but her voice steady. "Your Honor, I may not have wealth. I may not have the polished programs or the expensive reports, but I have something no money can buy. I have lived every moment of my son's life. I have held him through every storm, guided him through every word, celebrated every victory. I have proof." She lifted her phone and pressed play. A video filled the courtroom with her boy's voice, halting but proud. Carr read. Another clip followed, him clapping to the beat of a nursery rhyme, then smiling shyly as she kissed his cheek. The sound of that laugh filled the room like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The gallery grew quiet. Even the journalists lowered their pens. Watching, her son, sitting at the table beside her, looked up with wide eyes. He stood, tugged her sleeve, and in a clear, shaky voice said, "Mom." It was simple, ordinary, yet in that courtroom it rang louder than any gavel. Tears burned her eyes, but she kept her chin high. She reached down, taking his hand, and faced the judge. The silence stretched. The father's lawyers shuffled papers nervously, but their arguments now felt hollow, their voices drowned by a child's single word. At last, the judge spoke. "This court has seen enough. The evaluator's report is hereby stricken from the record. An investigation will proceed into the alleged misconduct. In the matter of custody," he paused, looking over the mother and son. His gaze softened just slightly. "The best interests of the child lie with the parent who has demonstrated love, commitment, and truth. Custody is awarded to the mother." The gavel fell. The room erupted, reporters rushing out to file stories, murmurs of shock, gasps of relief. Her ex-husband stood frozen, his mask of composure shattered. She sank into her chair, pulling her boy into her arms. He pressed his car into her hand as if offering her his greatest treasure. And for the first time in months, her tears were not born of fear but of triumph, because love had spoken and it had been heard. The world outside the courthouse felt different that day. The air was crisp, the winter sun brighter, as though the city itself had paused to witness what had just unfolded inside those solemn walls. She stepped down the stone steps slowly, her son's small hand clutched in hers, Daniel walking close behind. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but she no longer felt the weight of their judgment. She felt free. For months, fear had lived inside her chest. fear of losing the boy she had built her life around, fear of being silenced by money and power. Now that fear had loosened its grip. Justice, though scarred and battered, had chosen truth. Life afterward was not suddenly easy. Bills still came. Shifts at the diner were still long. Her son still had nights when the world overwhelmed him, when she had to hold him through tears until his breathing slowed. But now there was a quiet certainty beneath it all. No one could question her place beside him again. In the weeks that followed, letters poured in, some from strangers who had seen the news, others from parents who whispered, "Thank you, you fought for us too." She read each one late at night, sitting by the glow of the kitchen lamp while her son slept peacefully in the next room. Every word reminded her that her story had reached beyond the walls of one courtroom. It had become a beacon for others, a reminder that love and perseverance could stand against even the heaviest injustice. Her son continued to grow. One morning, while they sat on the living room rug surrounded by puzzle pieces, he looked up, eyes bright, and said, "Mom, help please." Two words, simple and halting, but for her, they were the sweetest sentence she had ever heard. She laughed through tears and pulled him close, whispering, "Always, my love, always." The man she once called her husband faded into the background of her life, his wealth unable to shield him from scrutiny. Investigations followed, and his polished image cracked in the public eye. She did not linger on him. Her fight had never truly been against him alone. It had been against a system that had tried to measure love in dollars and cents, and she had won. As spring arrived, she and her son planted flowers outside their apartment. Small green shoots pushed through the soil, fragile but certain, much like the life they were building together. She watched him pat the earth with his small hands, his face smudged with dirt, and thought, "This is enough." More than enough, she had not only kept her child, she had kept her hope, her dignity, her place in the world. To those of you who have walked with me through this story, thank you. Stories of family are not just about hardship, they are about resilience, about the fierce love that holds us together when everything else falls apart. I wish you health, I wish you peace, and most of all, I wish you the warmth of family around your own tables. May you find strength in each other, and may love always have the final word. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of those you love.